Sure. Did you set it up to start streaming and recording? Okay. You are. Yes, you are. Hi, good evening, everyone. Once again, thank you so very much for the invite, Pastor Dr. Canady. And we are grateful that we are able to try once again. So hopefully tonight everything works out the way that it needs to work out. So my name, as Dr. Kennedy said, is Dr. Tamir Piassin. I am a licensed professional counselor. I'm also a nationally recognized certified rehab counselor. And in the state of Pennsylvania, I am pending my license as a clinical psychologist. Some disclosures that I want to get out of the way before we get started. Give me one moment here. As Dr. Kennedy mentioned, as Pastor mentioned, I am an assistant professor at California University, which is here in Pennsylvania, where I teach undergraduate psychology as well as graduate psychology for individuals who are in our school psychology program, so they're future school psychologists. I am an author, a speaker, and a clinician. I have written my first book earlier this year, which is scheduled to come out in May on National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day. And the book is called Corey's Back, and it goes through a young black boy's life as he goes through and struggles with mental illness. I also own Serenity for Youth and Families, and I host a virtual storytime show during the COVID-19 period online on my Facebook Live. So, Pastor, I just wanted to double check with you before I continue to make sure that everyone can still hear me. I know that we've had issues with the connection on the audio side, so I want to make sure that everyone under your feet is able to hear me.
Okay. As far as I know, everybody hear her? Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So we are going to cover today what is mental illness. We're going to cover pediatric mental illness, paying close attention to Black children, and the effects of COVID-19 on Black children. And then we'll end off with tips and resources that I'll provide to parents, guardians, anyone working with our youth. In addition to that, I really want this to be a fluid conversation. So what do I mean by that? If you have questions, if you have comments, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section. I will be sure to keep track of time so that I can answer as many questions as possible. Even when we are no longer live, I can go back and respond to the comments as well. So what is mental illness? When I am providing this description, this is mental illness as a whole. So including all races, all genders, this is as a whole. Mental illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, behaviors, mood, or the way they feel. So what does that mean? A person that is struggling with mental illness, whether it's diagnosed, so that means they've seen a clinician, a provider who has given them a diagnosis, a mental health diagnosis, or it's not diagnosed, and they're struggling with the symptoms, they're going to present with issues with around their thoughts. So, for example, let's say a person is struggling with depression. If you're struggling with depression, your thoughts are not going to be the logical thoughts, the clear thoughts that they would often be if you were not struggling with those symptoms. So, if that person who's struggling with depression, they're hopeless, they feel like life is not worth living anymore, the people around them aren't supportive, they're irritable. If the thought to end their life comes to mind, they're more likely to entertain that thought because they are not thinking straight. They're not thinking logically. So that's what we mean when we say it affects the person's thinking. What they would typically think, if something like that were to come to mind, dismissing it, they have a harder time dismissing those thoughts when they are experiencing symptoms that require treatment. Behaviors are going to change. So they may end up sleeping more, sleeping less, eating more, eating less, or not eating at all, or not sleeping at all. They may be quite irritable. So the littlest things get under their skin. They're frustrated with people, oftentimes the people who are closest to them. So if you think in the context of COVID-19, if this same person is at home with their loved ones and their loved ones are providing support, they're making meals, everything is for the most part okay, they still will find ways, not because they're trying to, because they're symptomatic, they'll find ways, some way, somehow, to get into an argument with their loved ones. So behavior and mood is affected. So when someone is experiencing mental illness, they will have, as I mentioned, but I'll recap, they'll have issues with their what we call the activities of daily living, the ADLs. So they may not be taking care of their personal hygiene. It may be days before they actually brush their teeth, take a shower, groom themselves. It may be days without sleeping or sleeping too much, sleeping too little. It may be days where they're eating too much, eating too little, or not at all. Now, I should say, thinking about COVID-19, when I say eating too much, I am not talking about boredom. Like you're sitting in the house, COVID-19, we can't go anywhere. So every 15 minutes, you go and you look in the fridge, you're like, oh, what could I put in my mouth now? Not that kind of eating. This is clinical eating because of symptoms of a mental disorder. In Black, when we look at African Americans or the Black community, mental illness affects us in ways that, unfortunately, are we don't address as much as we should or we could. So according to a census that was done looking at this data, 13.2% of the US identifies as either Black or African American. So you'll hear me interchangeably say Black or African American, but I'm referring back to the same group of individuals. Individuals who don't consider themselves African American, but they consider themselves or identify themselves as Black would be people who, for example, are from the Caribbean. So let's say they are a Black Dominican, a Black Haitian, a Black Jamaican, a Black Colombian. They may not identify as solely Hispanic. If they're coming from a Latin country, they might identify as Black because of their skin tone, because of the way they grew up, etc. So when I say Black, I include all of those individuals, and that's how the census includes them as well. So if you think of 13.2% of the US population identifying as Black, of those 13.2%, 16%, over 16% of those individuals had a diagnosable mental illness in the past year. So that means they were struggling with depression, they were struggling with anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, any one of those conditions, but they were not necessarily receiving treatment, or they didn't know that they were struggling with it, so they were trying to manage on their own. The 16% accounts for that's over 6.8 million people. So in context, that is the city of Chicago, Houston, Texas, and Philadelphia combined. That's a lot of people. Imagine 6.8 million Black people struggling with mental illness or something that they could receive treatment for under the umbrella of mental diseases or mental illness, but they're not receiving treatment for a number of reasons. We know some of the reasons are because of, unfortunately, fear of the medical system, because of what has happened in the past. We know that some of those issues are because of access, lack of access to providers who truly understand what their lives or can empathize to what they're going through. It could be lack of access due to not having health insurance. It could be all of those. So we know that there are a number of reasons why we in the Black community, unfortunately, may not seek mental illness, mental treatment. So continuing with mental illness in the Black community, some of the prevalence. So 20% of Black individuals are more likely to report serious psychological distress when compared to whites. So that means if you have a group where we have 10 individuals, Black and white, if we are looking at the 10 individuals, if we're looking at, again, the 10 individuals, 20% of those individuals, so 2 out of 10 will experience serious psychological distress. So they're having a tough time at work, at home, at school, in areas outside of their home. They're struggling big time, and they're not maybe receiving any type of support. Black individuals experience feelings of hopelessness, sadness, feelings of worthlessness, and oftentimes in our community, we brush them off. Oh, I need to pray more. When I say this, please understand, I'm not saying that you shouldn't pray. You definitely, if you are one who knows that prayer helps, which we know prayer helps, pray. But that does not mean not to take care of the medical side of things, going and seeking treatment when treatment is necessary. When compared to other races and ethnicities, Black individuals are more likely to experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, what we call PTSD. You've probably heard that word flying around, especially when it's attached to veterans. In America, we know, in the United States, that Black individuals are more likely to be victims of hate crimes, violence, with whether it be in our communities or outside of our communities, passive aggressive kinds of acts of violence in the workplace, in school settings. So as a result of constantly going into spaces that may not be, for most of us, welcoming, individuals present with symptoms that could actually be diagnosed as PTSD. We know that Black youth are more likely to entertain thoughts of suicide and act on thoughts of suicide when compared to their white peers. So a research was done, and they found that 8.3% of Black teens versus 6.2% of white teens, when they had the thought of suicide, so the thought of, oh, I can't stand this anymore, life is not worth living, I'm better off dead, I'm going to kill myself, I'm going to find a way to end my life. 8.3% of them, being Black, are more likely to follow through with that plan, follow through with the thought that comes to mind than their white counterparts. This study was one that was quite interesting that I wanted to at least bring up. And by no means am I saying this is across the board. This was a really profound study. And I bring it up because in my practice, what I often see is that I have individuals, whether they're young or young at heart, they come in and they say, Dr. P, I don't want to be on meds. Or Dr. P, these are the meds that I'm on. I am not a medical professional. So the medical professional would be the psychiatrist or the physician that's prescribing medications. The clinical side, at least in the state of Pennsylvania at this moment, clinicians aren't allowed to prescribe medication. So I'm taking the clinical route here as the behavioral health professional expert. When individuals come to my office or come to other offices and they say that they've been given medications and the medications aren't working. This study spoke to some of this, where it looked at a multi-state treatment of children who had ADHD, which you've probably heard. And they found that when they provided treatment using medication to Black children, and Latinos as well, but we're speaking to Black kids right now. So when they gave medications to Black children, comparing it to how the medications did to their counterparts, these are our Caucasian white kids, the medications did not work as well. They were not as effective for these kids. And so they found that they needed to do more as it relates to maybe changing medications, adding more medications, making adjustments to those medications, plus introduce therapy so that these kids did better. So what am I saying when I say this? I bring this up to say that oftentimes when people come to my office, and some of my colleagues as well, we're not quick to say, okay, you need to be on medications. And many of my colleagues who are psychiatrists, so these are the MDs in the field, they often find themselves as well saying, okay, what have you tried before we just give you medications? Medications should not be a quick fix for anyone. Now, am I saying that medications aren't helpful? No, by no means. For individuals, medications work and they work really well. For some individuals, it's a combination of the medications and therapy. I always want to ask, and I challenge my families, the clients that I work with, to try clinical treatment first or in combination if you do need to take medications. So when we look at mental illness in children or in teens, common diagnosed conditions in children include ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This is often the condition that affects the child's ability to pay attention, to focus, to plan accordingly. It's in that prefrontal cortex area that really helps them plan, manage their emotions, be able to predict future things based on their own actions. They struggle with that. A combination of ADHD would be having the issues with inattention, not being able to pay attention and focus and plan accordingly, with the hyperactivity. So being the kid that bounces off the walls, super hyperactive, etc. We see anxiety, depression, developmental disabilities such as autism, intellectual disabilities, eating disorder, and PTSD. Symptoms of mental illness in children differ from those of adults. So let's take depression, for example. In a typical situation where an adult is experiencing symptoms of depression, they may be there. You may see changes in their mood. You may see changes in appetite. You may see changes in sleep. With children, you may see that as well, but you're definitely going to see changes in frustration tolerance. So that means they're kind of really irritable. Every little thing seems to get under their skin. They have outbursts of aggression for some of them. So you may think that these are issues because you're going through puberty. He's a teenager, she's a teenager, it's the social issues that are going on. It could very well be part of their typical development, but you don't want to dismiss it and say that it's just that. It could be that they're struggling with symptoms of depression. So having a thorough evaluation, a holistic view of what's going on with that kid is recommended. So that means the provider, the clinician who's providing treatment, is asking you questions, asking the child questions, working with anyone else who provides support, conducting an evaluation to truly get a good picture as much as possible as to what's going on with this child. So in kids, you may see acts of aggression, behavioral expressions of the problems well before they're able to say it. So kids will show you that there's something wrong before they can actually tell you that there's something wrong. So showing you, yelling, screaming, not eating, getting kicked out of classes, being really argumentative, all of that, they will show you those things before they even themselves are able to put into words, if they're able to recognize that they're struggling, to put into words that there's something going on. Continuing on with mental illness in children, these numbers are staggering. So 1 in 6 U.S. aged children between the ages of 6 and 17 experience a mental disorder each year. Think about that. Let's say you are a family who has been blessed with 6 kids. So according to this stat, it's saying that out of your 6 babies, out of your 6 little people, 1 of them will end up with the mental health diagnosis. And by no means am I saying that having a mental health diagnosis or mental illness is the end of the life for that person. Not at all. Recovery is an ongoing process. Individuals do well when they are partnered with people, clinicians who are supportive. They have insight into what's going on, where to seek treatment, and so on and so on. But just to put that in perspective, again, if you are a parent who has 6 kids, or let's say if you are a teacher, an educator, and you have a smaller classroom, that's suggesting that out of the 6 kids in your classroom, at least 1 will end up with a mental illness or be treated for a mental health disorder. An estimated 15 million of our young people in the nation currently carry a mental health disorder. That's a whole lot. When you think of kids, you think of young people who are having fun, they're enjoying life, they're going to school. School, for the most part, is their full-time job. They are meeting with friends, they're going on play dates, they are living. So to think about 15 million young people struggling, oftentimes in silence, with a mental disorder that could be treated or untreated, that's definitely alarming. It's concerning. 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by the age of 14. Think about that. By the age of 14, 50% of all lifetime mental illness. So that means by the age of 14, half of the kiddos in our country will be struggling with some kind of mental illness, and they'll end up carrying a diagnosis. So when we look at pediatric mental illness in the African American community, or the Black, and looking at Black kids, a study that was posted out by SAMHSA, the government, found that since 1993, the rates for suicide among within our Black communities have increased significantly. So I know that just words on the street, essentially, for lack of a better word, I used to hear people say, "Oh, Black people don't kill themselves. Black people ain't worried about that. Our kids aren't trying to kill themselves. That's some white people stuff." That's not the case. Our Black children are thinking about killing themselves, especially when they're faced with stressors at school that they feel like they have no say, no control, no support. It becomes really overwhelming for them. Now, add that to them going to returning home to maybe parents who don't understand mental illness, who are struggling with their own mental illness, who may not be supportive for whatever reason. Any of those situations, that even increases the symptoms for that child even more so. There was a 5-year retrospective multi-institutional study. So that means this study was done not only at one location. They looked at more than several, but many locations throughout the United States. And they found from 2012 to 2016, and they found, when they were looking at emergency room visits, out of over 290,000 pediatric emergency room visits, 20% of them were of children of color, Black kids, who actually carried mental health needs. So that means these kids, out of 200,000 plus, 58,000 of them, when they were seen for maybe a broken toe, they were seen for a tummy ache, they were seen for chronic headaches, whatever it is that they went to the emergency room for, the clinicians in the emergency room who evaluated them, so the pediatrician, the nurse, whoever saw them, actually found that they were struggling with a mental health need. So it could be that they were struggling with depression, anxiety, you name it. When we look at Black children, when compared to their counterparts, they're more likely to carry a mental health diagnosis. So that's 78.4 for every 100,000 in the population. That should be concerning to you, especially if you have children, you work with our community, or you aspire to work with our community. Understanding what the needs are now truly, hopefully, will equip you with the knowledge you need to know, so when you are in the field providing services, you don't think that this child is the only token child struggling with mental illness. So I'm showing you this graph for a reason, which I'll explain in the next slide, but I wanted to point out where you see, this is the IDEA who published this stat or findings as it relates to how many children who receive support under the umbrella of the IDEA Act. So maybe they have an IEP, they receive some kind of special ed services in a public school setting. So in the school year of 2017 to 2018, these are the percentages of ethnic or racial breakdowns of kids who receive services, special ed services. And as you can see, American Indian Native Alaskans are at the top, 18%, and our Black children are right after them, right below them, 16%. I'll bring your attention to the one that says 2 or more races, 14%. Imagine, and I'm just speculating here as it relates to that 2 or more percent. Oftentimes, what I found in whether it was my role in the clinical hospital setting or in educational settings now, oftentimes when we have kids who identify as biracial, they they are black mixed with white or black mixed with Asian, etc. They oftentimes will select two or more races. Now, if they're selecting two or more races, that could potentially mean that the stat here for the black kids actually are much higher than what is listed here. So keep that in mind. Kids receiving special ed services, they have an IEP, they're receiving some kind of special education. Our kiddos, in the black community, they're at 16% when it comes to receiving services. Now, when it comes to now looking at COVID-19 and black children at school, for the most part, and I say for the most part because I recognize that not all school districts are created equally. Not all schools have the same access to services, to qualified educators, you name it, as some other ones. So I say this as a global. For the most part, if we didn't have COVID-19, our kids in the black community would be at school. At school, they would have access to internet. At school, they would have access to some kind of technology and additional special ed services, similar to what I mentioned, those who are receiving special ed services. They would have access to a special ed teacher, maybe a speech therapist, an occupational therapist, if that was what was needed in school. They would have access to those services. At home, during COVID-19, they don't have access to, not many of them don't have access, and they may not have access to some of those things that were listed here under the school. So that means if they're in an underserved community, they may have no access or very little access to internet, but now they're required to complete schoolwork online. They may have no access or little access to computer technology, but they're required to have a computer, a laptop, some kind of a device for them to be able to read emails from the school, reply to teachers, respond by posting their homework assignments, and so on and so on. They have little to no access to supplemental educational support. So they don't have, in many cases, a special ed teacher coming home to them to provide that support. Now, I've heard anecdotally that there have been some special educators who have gone above and beyond and have driven to their students' homes, stayed within a fair distance to share whatever support they can. That's not the case everywhere across the nation. So our children, the children of color, individuals, kiddos who are in the Black community, African American community, if they are thinking about this percentage here, the 16% who have a special education plan or support need, those kiddos may not be receiving the support that they need while they're at home because of COVID-19. They're home. Parents are doing the best that they can. They are reaching out to providers if they know how. And I say if they know how because some parents just don't know who to reach out to, how to connect with individuals, especially if they're coming from communities where they have no access to the technology, the computer services, etc. Someone even told me, this was a school administrator, that there are some students who have no access to a desk to be able to do the work at home. Think about that for a minute. If you're fortunate enough to have a dining table, to have a desk at home, to have a coffee table, think about the fact that because of COVID-19, kids are home working, completing their schoolwork from home. They have no access to a desk, a coffee table to put their laptop or to complete their work. And I get some people are saying, well, they can go old school and just sit on their bed and complete the work. Yes, if they have to push through that, they will. But we are now in 2020. That should not be the case. So that, again, speaks to communities that are underserved, not receiving adequate resources and supports that they need. So this brings us to, what do you do? So we know that children, Black children, struggle with mental illness, oftentimes spoken, unspoken. They are more likely than their white counterparts to entertain thoughts of suicide and, unfortunately, even attempt the suicide. We know that Oftentimes they will receive medications. Sometimes the medications are effective, sometimes they are not as effective, and so they need even more services to be able to address. What can you do as a parent, as a guardian, as a youth leader to provide support? Well, first you have to be educated on how the brain works. So I thought it would be easiest to provide you with some information via this screen that you're seeing here, and then go into a video and provide even more detail from there. So on your left, you see the brain. So the brain has an upstairs part. So if I were to put my fist up, just like in this image, this would be, for example, the brain. When it's closed, that's the whole brain. So you see the brain, the upstairs brain, the prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain, is the part that controls thinking, problem solving, helping that child control their body. And I say child when it comes to this, but it truly is everyone. This is what happens to everyone. So keeping that child, giving that child the ability to control their body, so not being as impulsive, etc. Helping that child understand what it means to, or try to imagine what it means to go through a struggle that they're not experiencing, but maybe a friend's experiencing. So empathy, seeing, walking in the shoes of someone else as much as possible, imagining that, and being able to play. That's great. The downstairs brain, so that where your thumb is here, the is where it controls the amygdala. It controls our breathing. So you don't have to worry about breathing. It does that automatically. If we had to think about breathing every single time, we'd be in trouble. We'd have to say, okay, breathe right now. Tamara, breathe right now. I'd be in trouble because obviously I've been talking for some time now and you've not heard me say to myself, other than that example, to breathe. So that happens automatically. Then we have the fight or flight. These are hardcore programs. We're born that way. It keeps us protected from situations that could be potentially dangerous. So you probably have heard people say, oh, she flipped her lid. Oh, he flipped his lid. So the brain, when it's closed like this, all of those things, the upstairs brain is able to control the body control, empathy, playing, breathing. It controls all of that. But once the person is triggered by, it could be anything that they have no sense of control to be able to control, their lid is flipped. So only the downstairs brain, only the things that are automatic survival techniques are what is in play. So breathing, fight or flight. And so, for example, if that child thinks they're in danger, that automatic flipping of the brain, if they don't have the skills to help them, is going to bring them to a point where they're trying to figure out, should they fight their way out of the problem? Should they run their way out of the problem? Or should they just freeze because they're so scared they don't know what to do? So with that, I wanted to show this is a 2-minute video. It's 3 minutes, but we're only going to play 2 minutes of it to bind that together even more so for you before I go into what you can do even more so as a provider, a parent, a guardian.
Hold your hand up like this, fold your thumb in, close your fingers down. This is a model of your brain. So the eyes, if there's a head here, they'd be looking out the front this way. This is the outside of that brain, that wrinkly part you see when you see a brain. And at the very front, right behind your forehead here, the smart part, the prefrontal cortex. It makes the decisions. Now, inside, you can't see it, but we're going to open it up like this, and we're going to see the thumb area and down here in the palm. These two areas work together. The limbic system, the emotions, the feelings part, when you feel scared, when you're really angry, when you're out of control and you're upset, you can't think straight. And here, the brain stem keeps your heart beating and your lungs breathing, and it makes you move your hand away from a hot stove really quickly. These two areas working together saves your life from a tiger. It sends out a warning signal, danger, danger, and our heart beats. We breathe fast and shallow. Our muscles tense so that we can run or we can fight and save our lives, which is very handy if a tiger is chasing you. Not so handy if you're sitting in a classroom. Now what happens? The alarm will go off, and they're false alarms. You know, false alarms in the school when the fire alarm goes off and there was no fire and we all have to leave the building anyway. Well, that's what happens here. Somebody might criticize you, or your teacher tells you to sit down and please do your work, and you get all upset. That's not a real alarm. You're not really in danger. Yet, the alarm is set and you flip your lid. You lose the smart part. And this part is now in control. What can you do to get this smart part back? Start breathing slow, in through your nose, out through your nose, way down into your belly. Let your shoulders go. Relax, relax. Relax your body and breathe. This will trick this part. Look what's happening.
And I'll stop it there. So that hopefully provided you with an additional visual as to what happened. So in that video, she mentioned fight, flight. In the field, we know there's a freeze part as well. So let me paint you a scenario. So we have this kid named James. He forgets to hand in his online homework. He forgets to hand it in because the power went out. He didn't have access to a hotspot or a battery that was able to allow his laptop to connect to his phone. He had issues. He was not able to address them, so he doesn't hand in his homework. Now, James is behaving before he receives skills. So he does not know what to do when he's faced with this kind of a dilemma. So what happens, because it's automatically programmed, his brain receives an alarm. There's something wrong. James, you forgot to hand in your homework. The teacher sends mom an email or sends a phone call and says, hey, I understand that you guys are working from home, but this is now the second time that James has forgotten to hand in his homework. He's going to receive a 0. James overhears this conversation and he knows he's going to get it. He's in trouble. So the brain is sending him this alarm. His brain is going to tell him one of 3 things. Fight. So that could mean get into an argument with mom, try to defend yourself, try to give her something else to not focus on the homework piece. So that fighting, just automatically, what do you mean I didn't hand it in? Leave me alone. Whatever it may be, he's fighting. Or the other option may be freezing. So mom comes, gives James an earful, and James has nothing to say. He is stone face cold. He doesn't say anything. He barely even gives mom eye contact. He's frozen. Or he flights. He flees the situation. He avoids mom at all costs. And then in turn, he's avoiding even completing the schoolwork. So not only is he probably choosing automatically, because the brain is programmed to survive and thrive if it's faced with danger, his brain is going to select one of these 3 things to do, and he's going to do one of those 3 things. Not only with mom, when he's confronted by mom, but when he finally is able to get online with the teacher as well. Those are all Fs. That is where, without skills, our kids are. Straight Fs. We don't want them in the straight F category. What we want them, I came up and I coined straight A's. Assess, address, and achieve. We want our kids to have straight A's when it comes to managing situations that are crisis situations that we know with appropriate support and skills, they are able to achieve what it is that's set in front of them. So what are the straight A's? The straight A's, the first one is assess. So going back to that same situation, James forgot to hand in his homework because of the technical issues. He overhears the conversation that mom is having with the teacher. He has skills. So now we're saying that he has skills, and the way he learned those skills was through therapy, with parental support. They learned on how to control his breathing. So he has those skills. We're saying, he received all that support. He has those skills. He's going to be able to assess the situation. He's going to say to himself, maybe out loud, but usually quiet in his mind, oh man, I'm going to get it. I need to figure out how to not get into even more trouble. He's going to talk to himself or have the dialogue of what's the problem, what possible outcomes could potentially be good or not so good for me if I don't address those problems. So he looks at the pros and cons of avoiding mom. He looks at the pros and cons of yelling back at mom. He looks at the pros and cons of freezing up. He looks at the pros and cons, so the benefits, the not so good benefits of yelling at the teacher via email. He looks at the pros and cons of emailing the teacher or avoiding the teacher. He looks at all of those and he's able to assess the situation. What is a true danger? If there is no true danger, but it's still something I need to address, how can I address it? So he assesses and he comes up with a plan. Then he addresses that plan. So he puts that plan into action. So James is thinking, okay, it is best that I tell mom what happened so that if I'm going to get in trouble, I get in trouble, but at least she hears my side of the story and doesn't assume that I just didn't want to hand in my work. So he addresses mom and lets mom know, hey, mom, it's not that I didn't want to do it. Do you remember the other day when we had a power outage? The computer wasn't working. The internet wasn't working. I didn't do my assignment because of that. And I completely forgot the next day. So now the ball is in mom's court because he's addressed it. So mom can now decide to still punish him or work with him to come up with a creative solution so that he can hand in his homework. As part of that addressing, let's say James is old enough to recognize that he can email his teacher too and let his teacher know his side of the story. So he emails because he had already assessed. So now he's addressing. He emails the teacher and lets the teacher know that it wasn't done on purpose. He was not being negligent. It was because he had a power outage. He attempted to do the work, but didn't have access to the internet. And so the next day, it slipped his mind. Again, the ball now is in the teacher's court, similar to mom's court. The teacher now can say, okay, James, here's an opportunity to make it up, or no. Whatever the outcome is, James has done his part. So then that brings him to achieve. He has now learned how to problem solve with people outside of himself, as well as with himself. Instead of allowing the automatic fight, flight, or freeze happen, he's learning to assess the situation, come up with a plan, address the situation, putting that plan into practice, into play, and then seeing whatever happens. And so then he achieves. He's successful in communicating with other people what his needs are, and they can now provide support if they are able to. So that's where we want kids to go. Not from the straight Fs. We want them to go into the straight A's as it relates to being able to address their emotions and the issues that come along with mental illness or without mental illness, simply problem solving. So how do you talk to your kids about COVID-19? So now you've learned to hopefully teach them how to address. We know that you have to address the situation. You have to, in order to address, you have to assess and then to be able to help them to achieve it. But as parents, as guardians, as leaders working with children, you have to be aware of what role you play as well. So you want to be aware of your nonverbals. So I can say everything is fine and I'm looking like this and my body's telling me that nothing is fine because I'm all tensed up. So I'm saying everything is fine. It's coming out of my mouth, but my body language is saying something completely different. Kids pay attention to that. They are in tune to your nonverbals. So you want to stay calm as much as possible and provide reassurance. You let them know things will be okay. I have put things into place to make sure that we have food. Even if we don't have food because I've lost my job, I have resources to be able to go and get some food somewhere else. Now, obviously, you're not going to have that type of conversation with every child. Every age has different conversations that you can have with them. So you probably could have that conversation with a young adult, a teenager, etc., and then with a little person, a younger kiddo, formulate it in a way that helps them understand that you are saying that things will be okay. You will take care of them. You are here to provide support. You want to set time aside to both listen and talk to your child about their thoughts and their feelings. For some people, they feel uncomfortable. And I get it. They can feel uncomfortable having a one-to-one conversation about thoughts and emotions. Like, I've heard, oh, that's so icky, Dr. P. Why would I want to talk to anybody about that? I get it. Well, find a way that works best for you. Maybe it's having a conversation with your child as you both cook, as you do some yard work, as you're playing. I will tell you, kids will tell you a lot more when they are engaged in a game activity, something that's not directly, something that they're not directly focusing on as it relates to whatever it is that's bothering them. They will share more information while they're playing than when they're not. So you want to make sure you set time aside to have conversations with the child. Avoid the blame game. I'm just going to say, when it comes to avoid the blame games, we cannot look to outsiders, the media, people in power, to say, oh, it's their fault. You have to remind children that, you know what, whatever we can take ownership of, I made the mistake, but not pointing fingers. That opens up doors for unfortunately, acts of violence towards other communities, acts of discriminations toward other communities. So you want to avoid the blame game. You let that child know, well, if they say, well, I heard that it's the Chinese people's fault. No, we're not saying it's the Chinese people's fault. There are viruses and illnesses that come out all the time. And our job, maybe not my job, it's the job of the scientists, the job of the researchers, etc., is to find out what causes those issues and what best way to address them. So don't fall into the trap of blaming a different nationality, a different culture, etc. Limit access to news, TV, internet, radio, friends, you name it. Children we know that since COVID-19, they've been spending more time on social media, screen time in general. And so with that, imagine you as an adult, when you're bombarded with all this news that has been toxic, not helpful, it can be really depressing. It can be scary. You can feel melancholy. Like, it doesn't feel great. So now imagine putting all those burdens onto a young person. That's even more of an issue, on top of the fact that they're working at home to work on schoolwork when they're used to seeing their friends, having extracurricular activities with friends, etc. That is not what we want them to experience. So you want to make sure you limit access to the news. If you're going to watch it maybe once a day, if it's something that you know is not going to be the brightest news, maybe not have them in the room while you watch. And you can recap when you have that one-to-one conversation time with them. You recap what's going on to the degree that they're able to tolerate. You want to, as much as possible, maintain a realistic schedule. I giggle because sometimes myself, I don't maintain a realistic schedule. I work from home now, so I either am providing therapy via telemental health, or I am teaching my students, both graduate and undergraduate students, online via Zoom calls. And sometimes I find myself at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, replying to emails. And I have to remind myself, like, nope, this is not your office hours. Go to bed. Go and do something for you. Try as much as possible to maintain a realistic schedule, a daily routine, especially for children. If you can remember, if they were at school, they would have a routine that they would need to follow Monday through Friday. They're waking up at a certain time, getting their meals, taking a shower, whatever it is their morning routine would be before they get out the house. You want to try to stick as close as possible to that. Now, I'm not by any means saying if your child used to wake up at 5 a.m., you need to wake them up at 5 a.m. No, don't mean at all. I am not saying that, especially if you have tons of little ones at home. If you've got 2 or 3 kids in grade school, getting them up at 5 a.m., yeah, don't do that. But you want to make sure that they have a schedule that they know that they're going to follow. So if they know that they have to be up by 9 a.m. to have breakfast, so you let them sleep in, they have breakfast, and then take care of their ADLs, their hygiene, and then by 10 a.m. they start schoolwork, then make sure that that is something that's consistent Monday through Friday so they know what to expect Monday through Friday. Don't sugarcoat. Provide honest and accurate information. Kids know when you lie to them. And if you are a good liar, I'm sorry that you're a great liar, but if you're a good liar, over time, they're going to pick up the holes in your story. The last thing you want is for a young person to not believe you, not put trust in you. It goes back to the reassurance piece. So if they are not able to trust you, it's hard for you to provide them reassurance because they know that you're lying to them. So you want to make sure as much as possible that you don't sugarcoat, you provide honest information that's accurate information at the age that's appropriate for them. You want to promote and teach proper hand hygiene. I know you've been bombarded with that information, but I can't stress it out enough. Making sure proper hand hygiene happens, whether it's washing after they touch the doorknob if they went outside, or making sure that they're sneezing and coughing into their elbow, or using a tissue and washing their hands afterwards, is promoting ways to prevent as much as possible COVID-19 from affecting them as well as the loved ones that they have at home. And then last but not least, you want to practice what you preach. If you were telling your young person, don't worry, but they hear you on the phone with Aunt Jane spazzing out, guess what they're going to do? They're going to be worried. They're going to want to spaz out because they saw you falling apart. Or if you tell them that they need to cough or sneeze in their elbow, but they see you going, and then you go and serve some food, then it's like, oh, well, I'm going to do whatever you do. You have to practice what you preach. So I'm going to leave this up on the screen for some time so you can take a picture of it if you'd like. These are some additional resources. One in particular, this book that says Why We Stay Home. It's an ebook, an electronic book that you can go onto this website and download for free. It was, the book was created by a boyfriend and girlfriend, a couple, African-American couple who are med students, and they wanted to find a way creatively to talk to kids about COVID-19 and why they have to stay home. And so I thought it was appropriate for me to at least provide you with the link there, so that way you can go download it, look at it. It's full of bright colors, and it really goes through explaining why kids stay home, why the whole family has to stay home. And again, it's a free resource to families. Other additional things I want to bring your attention to, the Child Mind Institute is a nationally recognized institute that focuses solely on mental illness in children, mental health, mental wellness. So with mental illness, you have also mental wellness. So mental wellness in the sense of whether you have a diagnosable condition or not, you always want as much as possibly to be mentally well, to be fit. So that means taking care of sleep, making sure you're eating right foods, making sure that you're engaging in constructive conversations so that mentally you're okay, you're as good as you can get, and continue to improve on that. Making sure that you're not staying in relationships or environments that are really toxic. So it goes through mental information for families and providers who work with children, along with the American Psychological Association, the Mayo Clinic, and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. There are additional links that you can click on, and they provide specific information on how to support young people during the COVID-19 crisis. So I'll give you about another minute or so if you want to take a picture of it, you can. And then as a reminder, I'm pretty sure that Pastor Canady, Dr. Canady will download this. So I'm pretty sure that you can return back and look at the video as well, so you have access to these resources. And then you have NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, who provides support to providers, to individuals. Sometimes they're called consumers, clients, patients who have who are working through recovery of mental illness, and as well as to those who are supporting their loved ones who have mental illness. They have resources even specifically for the African American community. And then we have the American Psychiatric Association, the National Association of Social Workers, the American Counseling Association. All of these providers are nationally recognized providers who provide access to resources for consumers, sometimes providers, and youth and families as it relates to providing services or seeking services due to COVID-19. So that is it. That's all I have to share with you. I can go on for hours, but I wanted to make sure that I tried as much as possible to reserve some time for questions. And I see that I went a little bit over, so I'm not sure if there were any questions that folks have. But essentially, what I want you to, my hope was that you walked away with a better understanding of knowing that mental illness knows no race, gender, socioeconomic status. You can be a millionaire and struggle for mental illness. What we know, though, is those who fall in the lower tier, those who are underserved populations, those who struggle paycheck to paycheck, are individuals who experience mental illness, but unfortunately sometimes don't have access to providers to provide services to them, access to even quality insurance to receive services. And then if they actually have access to providers, insurance to get services, they may not find a qualified, culturally competent clinician to provide services to them. I am Black. If you tell me as a white clinician, for example, that you know exactly what I'm going through, if I'm telling you that I've been on the victim side, I've been victimized as a Black woman, I'm going to look at you and question, are you thinking straight? Now, you can tell me I can imagine, but you can't tell me you know exactly what I've been through if you're not a Black woman. So making sure that, and I'm not saying that individuals of other races can't provide quality care. They can. I have a number of colleagues who have provided quality care. It's making sure that they are culturally competent and can provide the services to diverse populations. So my hope is that the information opened up your eyes and gave you more awareness that everyone struggles from mental illness to some degree as it relates to races, genders, etc. Making sure that you receive appropriate support and what support looks like and how to access support is really important. And recognizing that especially home right now for kids is a different ballgame. You cannot expect a child to spend 8 hours doing schoolwork as if they were physically in a school building. That the 8 hours that they would physically be in a school building would not be 8 hours of straight work. It would be lunchtime, playtime, free time, schoolwork, interacting with other people, etc. So you're not able to provide that. You have to become creative as to how they express their energy in a positive way, as well as they learn. So making baking something that they take part of with you, so that maybe you can throw some math into there, measuring, etc., gardening, you name it. Get creative in how you provide that support to them so that they are not suffering in silence. That is it from me.
Wow. Let's give Dr. Tamir Persaint a wonderful hand of applause. I mean, this was excellent. Can anybody just say excellent? I want
I
you.
appreciate it.
I want you to send those questions. You can do it through Facebook, or you can do it. If you don't have that, you can also send it to the church some kind of way, because we want to get this information out. She has on here her feed where you can find her. But she did an excellent job. What we'll do, we will look at the questions, and we're going to bring her back. Hopefully, very, very, very soon. I got to twist her arm, but we got to bring her back because this was excellent. Our children are suffering. Sometimes I think our children are over medicated. Sometimes we're just trying to calm them down. So we want to talk about a lot of those things the next time. But certainly, Dr. Tamir, thank you so much
You're quite
for
welcome.
spending time with us tonight. And thank you for what you did to get us on here tonight. But we are very appreciative of you. I'm going to put her picture up now so you'll see her name, Dr. Tamir Persaint. And you will be able to see who she is. But she's a wonderful addition to our community, doing some great work in our community. We are just very, very excited to have her at our church, being a part of our team. Those of you who go to Rodman, it's her voice that you hear every Sunday morning when we start out our worship services. So again, we want to thank her for joining us, and we are looking forward to having her with us again very, very, very soon. Amen. Want to thank all of you for looking tonight, and I pray that this was a helpful workshop for you. She will come back. We'll answer some of these questions that you may have. Hopefully, Van and some of the other people will be able to get those questions off of the live feed. Then we will pass those on to her. Next time she comes, she will deal with some of those things and give us some additional information. This is very, very exciting. Our children, a lot of times we forget about them and how they really feel about it, wearing masks and seeing people in these kinds of ways. So thank you so much. And also, when those children who don't have the access to the various things, truth of the matter is, many of them will be out of school for about 4 or 5 months, including the summer, and some of them, unfortunately, are going to be left behind. So we got to do everything that we can as a community to try to help these young people so that they will not be behind. As it was said, if you start the race behind, you will never be able to get in front unless you run faster than the people that are in front of you. So thank you again. Let us close out with a word of prayer. God, we thank you for this night. We thank you for Dr. Piersain, and thank you for everyone on this call. And I pray that something was said tonight to inspire them to get better and stronger. And Lord, help us to realize, God, that mental illness is not something to be ashamed of, but let's get the help that we need so that we can make a difference in the lives and live our purposeful life that you created us to have. Now, God, we thank you and we love you and trust you. Tomorrow night, I'll be beginning again with lesson number 4, building our faith. Want to ask that you will continue to give. Thank you for a wonderful day. Today, my voice almost left today, but we were able to make it through, and we thank God for that. But I am going to rest that voice. My wife going to give me the right tea and all that kind of stuff, and I'll be strong again tomorrow and every day this week. Thank you. We love you guys. And again, thank you, Dr. Piersain, and thank you for your wonderful presentation. Everyone, you can go back and look at this presentation. I will run it again, but it will be on my Facebook Live and our website. Thank you so much. Peace and blessings be unto each and every one of you.